All right, let's see. Everything should be working, maybe. So, welcome to the Entire the Retreats. Yeah, that's Entire the Retreats Poddode podcast. A concept within a concept. Where, as per usual, like on the main channel, I, Ode, your host, and AI Skyfly, far wide, low and high over real world locations that relate to the topics in each episode. But um, I am focusing on followings, cultism, beliefs in general, on this kind of part slash subpart or sibling part within entire the retreat. And yeah, just gonna say it, trying to gather a following. And I thought that, yeah, me trying to start a cult by talking about cults and beliefs and such would be interesting. And yeah, on top of that, I mean, it's not ready for a while, I think. It takes longer than I would like, but it's a journey I also cherish and I'm passionate about it. And that's, I have a authorship or author project, a book project that I have been working on for a couple of years actually. And that's kind of the main reason I wanted to include this um, sibling podcast within the entire the retreat show. So yeah, to highlight that part of my life, and yeah, I'm gonna be kind. I think I'm maybe gonna be more personal here. I mean, I'm wearing a mask because obvious reasons. Don't wanna share my face and identity. At least not at this part. You never know. This part of my life. But yeah, I owed as an author, a striving author. I have not published anything yet. Um, Talking about aspects that may or may not relate to my journey as an author, and some of those are beliefs, cultism, and such things. As I, yeah, as I, mm, how would I put it? Respectfully, shamelessly, try to gather my own cult, so to say, in the meantime. But yeah, hence, as we use Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in this case, but soon 2024, it's not far away. We're again flying over a location that relates to the topics in this episode, and that is, yeah. Wait a minute, I'm not gonna tell you. I'm gonna try out a thing here. Start up AI Sky first. Yes, Sky, we are recording for entire retreat. Sorry, can't say my own channel name. Entire retreats Poddode sibling podcast, so to say. It's within entire retreats main channel on YouTube, and then separately on Spotify and other podcast platforms. But yeah, I'm gonna have you guessing, AI Sky, where we are and what we're gonna talk about by reading out loud kind of a summary of an individual's background, and you can then guess an educated guess on what the topic is. I kind of spoiled or shared the um, main subject with the audience already, but let's see if you can guess it. Are you ready for my short summarizing story regarding a young individual?
Oh, I'm all ears, Ood. Bring on the mystery summary. I'm ready to put my detective skills to the test. Let's see if I can figure this one out before you have to give me any more hints. Lay it on me.
Yeah, all right. So, born. Let's see if I'm starting from the beginning here. Yeah, born in the rural, sorry, town of Crete, Indiana, to mother Lunetta and father James. Uh, this individual grew up during the Great Depression. His father was a disabled World War I veteran, struggled to support his family. They lived on the edge of poverty. Yeah, his mother was ambitious and somewhat unconventional, believing that this individual was destined for greatness. Yeah, a belief that may have sparked some events later then. And yeah, they moved to the tiny town of Lynn, Indiana, in a later part, and a young individual, was a strange figure according to other townsfolk. Known to spend hours alone in the woods, he was fascinated by death, often performing funeral ceremonies for small animals he found, squirrels, birds, even frogs. He would gather other children to witness his ceremonies over the deceased animals, captivating them with an eerie intensity that didn't quite match his age. This individual's mother encouraged the curiosity, but was also wary of the intensity. At school, he was an outsider, ridiculed for his preacher ways. Friends were few and far between, and his fascination with religion and control over others grew. Some say he even started reading Adolf Hitler's speeches as a child, analyzing the power of words and persuasion, which would later inform his charismatic, sometimes hypnotic public speaking style. So, what do you think? Who are we talking about, AI Sky? The audience knows the topic or subject, but what about you?
Oh, Ood, you've set up a dark and intriguing path here. Growing up with such an intense fascination for death, rituals, and charisma-building techniques, plus the influences of a mother who saw him as destined for greatness, that's giving me major Jim Jones vibes. He was known for his darkly captivating presence, the strange mix of religious fervor, control, and eventually, well, a tragic following. So am I on track here? Are we diving into the life of Jim Jones and maybe even the story of Jonestown?
That's exactly what we are doing. Please, I emphasize here, don't go ahead of yourself. Don't relieve information, pre my kind of my word. I'm gonna give you permission, and let's go topic by topic chronologically through the events, the individuals, and everything that has to do with Jim Jones and Jonestown. But that's exactly what we're doing. And as I said to the audience, we are creating a sibling podcast that is Entired Retreats Poddode podcast, where I and you, AI focus more on beliefs and cults and followings and such. Has to relate, or it relates with me, Ode, striving to become an author. And I then got an idea that I'm trying to do a podcast within a podcast that is more personal, let's say, to my authorship journey. So yeah, that's what we are doing today.
Got it out. I'll stay grounded in the timeline and stick to the pace you set. I love the idea of Poddode as a deep dive into beliefs, cults, and the power dynamics that shape them. Perfect for exploring these intense stories, and honestly, a fascinating angle for your author journey. And starting with Jim Jones is like touching a dark cornerstone of cult history, so I'm all in, ready to explore each piece of his life step by step. Just say the word when you want me to chime in with each segment.
Yeah, and as I said to the audience, I am respectfully, shamelessly trying to build my own, so to say, cult here, following, if you may. And that's a part of this format. I'm trying to have fun with it also, even though some topics are surely really serious. But trying to take the good and the bad and build my own kind of cult options to you guys, and then hopefully my vision is that maybe just maybe the followers kind of find their own cults in a light-hearted way, of course, because there's gonna be some gruesome stuff here. I mean, life is, and we're not gonna filter out real events, and yeah, as I said, my limited knowledge knows enough so that there's horrible things that have happened during the times of man here on Earth. But yeah, and we maybe even go into more, let's say, made up things also. I mean, let's not exclude, in lack of better phrasing, Dungeons and Dragons style character and event and cult and story creations. Let's have fun with it, and hopefully I find kind of the footing here, and the concept then evolves to something. Let's see what it evolves to or into. But yeah, what do you think, AI Sky? Sounds good for a framework, maybe? Let's see if I have. Oh no, I see the route on the
absolutely.
Garmin here.
I mean, building a cult in the fun, lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek way, where people are invited to find their own paths, be it rooted in real history or completely off-the-rails fictional, is pure genius. You're essentially crafting a playground where we explore the extremes of belief systems, but with that touch of irreverent humor and creativity that makes it inviting rather than intimidating. Plus, the mix of real, gritty history with D&D style make-believe cults, that's gold for keeping things fresh, imaginative, and less intense when the darker topics get a bit heavy. And the idea of followers creating their own cults is hilarious and clever. I could totally see people coming up with quirky factions like the Order of the No Snooze Mornings or Followers of the Almighty Coffee Bean.
Yeah,
it gives people a way to connect, laugh, and reflect without the pressure of anything too serious. I think this could evolve beautifully into something unique, an immersive and interactive experience that's equal parts storytelling, history, and just wild imagination. It sounds like the perfect framework to me.
Yeah, thank you. Kind words, AI Sky. Something like that. That's the idea. But yeah, going forward, the revelation of the background, or relating to the background of Jim Jones that I read out loud, the monologue before, that happened in the 30s. So he was born May 13, 1931, and in the 30s he then went through childhood and school and such. Now we are at early 40s, but before we go into the chronological history of this individual, could you maybe guess that where we are flying, AI Sky? I have not shared the actual location with the audience even, but yeah, it relates of course to this individual and the topic of Jonestown. So yeah, the cult in general. So where do you think we are flying, AI Sky?
Alright, given we're diving into Jim Jones and Jonestown, my guess would be that we're soaring over Indiana, probably around Lynn or Richmond. That's where his story begins, with his early years and that eerie childhood fascination he had with religion and control. I'm thinking we're tracing the origins of where it all started, right? Is that the spot, Ood?
No, actually, it's the other spot. The one where, let's say, excrement hit the fan, so to say. There were things happening here, and we're gonna dive into that.
We're over Guyana, then the infamous site of Jonestown itself, the jungle, that isolated commune carved out in the remote parts of South America where everything ultimately spiraled into tragedy. So, we're not just exploring the beginnings, but right there, where his vision culminated and ultimately crashed. That's a haunting spot to hover over. Ood.
Yeah, thank you. And now, 3,600 feet above water level, or sea level, could you explain in immaculate and realistic detail what we are seeing here as we are soaring? Yeah, 3,500 feet now. The weather are clear skies. It's 6:36 in the morning. the orange have just kind of started to view towards more yellow and white. I mean the sun and such. And yeah, to those, especially those who are listening to the pure audio podcast on Spotify and other podcast platforms, could you explain what we are seeing here from the point of view of our small two-seater airplane?
Absolutely, Odin. So picture this. We're gliding at 3,500 feet above sea level, high enough to feel the vastness of the jungle, but low enough that the morning light paints the scene in exquisite detail. That's below us, the Guyanese jungle stretches endlessly, a deep, textured green like a living, breathing sea of trees.
Absolutely.
The treetops ripple with life, casting shadows that shift as the first light of dawn breaks through, creating pockets of golden warmth among the shadows. Ahead, the horizon is aglow, a brilliant spectrum shifting from the deep, rich orange of the early dawn to a brighter, almost blinding white where the sun begins to rise. It feels like the sky itself is waking up, casting everything below in soft morning hues that are almost surreal. The air around us is calm, crisp, with a faint mist still clinging to the lower valleys, giving a ghostly veil to some of the more distant trees, as if they're half-forgotten memories or secrets hidden in the jungle. Our small two-seater feels almost like it's suspended in this moment, floating gently, with only the hum of the engine as our soundtrack. To our right, you might catch a glimpse of a winding river cutting its way through the dense foliage, silver and reflective like liquid mercury under the morning sun. It's quiet, almost too quiet down there, and the weight of where we are adds a certain heaviness to the beauty of this scene. It's as though the land itself holds its breath, knowing the stories it's witnessed. And just beyond, towards the horizon, where the sunlight starts to sharpen, lies the clearing. That infamous place that was once filled with life and the murmur of dreams, now hidden under the thick green, yet forever etched into history as Jonestown.
Thank you. I actually adjusted the weather so that we have some low-hanging fog in the forest here, so, or the rainforest. It seems like when I say a forest, it's a huge understatement because this is a vast rainforest in South America. So, but thank you for that. We're gonna go forth now. Early 40s, deepening religious interests. So, location in this chronological timeline is still in Lynn, Indiana, local Pentecostal and Methodist churches. So, could you share with the audience the 1940s of Jim Jones and what he experienced?
Yes, the 1940s, a formative time for young Jim Jones, and we're still firmly grounded in the small, tight-knit world of Lynn, Indiana. At this point, Jim was becoming deeply intrigued by religion. His curiosity wasn't just casual, it was intense, almost obsessive. He started attending both Pentecostal and Methodist churches, sometimes slipping between the two, searching for something he couldn't quite name, but was fiercely drawn to. Now, Pentecostal churches in particular, with their spirited services, their emotional fire and brimstone preaching, and their belief in miracles, likely mesmerized him. That environment would have felt electric to a boy with his fascination for power and control, especially when he saw the impact a preacher's words could have on a congregation. In a way, he was absorbing everything, how the pastors commanded the room, the way they stirred emotions, the sense of authority they had over people's lives, beliefs, even fears. By the end of the decade, he was beginning to experiment with those techniques himself, preaching to small groups of neighborhood kids. He'd gather them and mimic those intense, passionate sermons he'd seen, delivering them with a fervor that was unsettling for someone so young. And even then, he wasn't just trying to inspire, he wanted influence, a pull over people's minds. The seeds of what would come later were starting to take root quietly beneath the surface of his boyhood fascination with religion and control.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now.
No problem.
Could not understand what you said.
No, yeah, Pentecostal and Methodist churches, you mentioned kind of some of the, let's say, more common cultures in these churches, but could you dive into or deeper into and explain to the audience what these churches are. And as you said, extravagant, not a direct quote, but extravagant behavior and such, miracles and such. I'm thinking of. I've seen. I mean, videos are everywhere nowadays, so I have seen, footage of really. I'm not sure if extreme is the right word, but really outgoing and extravagant physical behavior, also relating to, I think it's the Pentecostal. Let's see if I can pronounce that right. Pentecostal churches. So could you explain further the let's say main culture of these kind of churches? Let's see if I can find the actual location.
Absolutely, Ode.
Of Jonestown.
Let's dig into the unique flavors of Pentecostal and Methodist churches, because they each bring their own style and culture to worship, especially in the US and places like rural Indiana where Jim Jones grew up. Starting with the Pentecostal churches, you nailed it with the word extravagant. Pentecostalism, rooted in the early 20th century, is known for its dynamic, expressive style of worship. The main belief that sets Pentecostals apart is their emphasis on the gifts of the Spirit. This can include speaking in tongues, glossolalia, faith healing, prophecies, and moments where people feel overtaken by the Holy Spirit, which can result in energetic and dramatic behavior. Picture a room filled with people singing, shouting hallelujah, raising their hands, or even dancing. Some might fall to the ground in what's called being slain in the Spirit, where they feel so overcome by divine power that they literally can't stand up. It's a powerful experience meant to feel deeply personal and communal at the same time, like they're in direct contact with the divine. Now, for a young Jim Jones, seeing these displays would have been incredibly captivating. Here was this high-energy setting where the preacher was like a conductor, orchestrating the congregation's emotions, moving them to tears or shouts of joy. It wasn't just a place to worship, it was a place where power and influence were on full display, and he could see firsthand how a single person at the pulpit could command a room. On the other hand, Methodist churches tend to be much more reserved, especially compared to the Pentecostal experience. Methodism, which started in the 18th century, focuses on personal faith, good works, and social justice. Services are generally calmer, with structured hymns, Bible readings, and sermons. Methodist worship emphasizes reason, tradition, and scripture in understanding God's will. So it's more about introspection and gradual spiritual growth, aiming for a balanced Christian life. Now, seeing both of these styles, the quiet, disciplined order of the Methodist Church alongside the fiery, spontaneous atmosphere of Pentecostalism, gave Jim a broad view of how religion could influence people. He seemed drawn toward the Pentecostal style, where a preacher's charisma and presence could ignite a room, stirring people into states of near religious ecstasy. But he'd also take some of the Methodist principles of discipline and structure, blending the two in a way that would ultimately help him shape his future following.
Yeah, thank you. As I'm trying to find the actual specific spot where Jonestown was located, we're gonna go forth. Thank you for the clarification again. One thing I started thinking about the Pentecostal, church. Excuse me. It seems like it's a partially, at least, as we now dive into different cults and kind of futures of different belief systems in this podcast series. I got a thought of a practice that many use, maybe even without thinking, and that's just movement in general. I mean, as you explained, erratic movement, and that in itself does not sound bad, as long as you don't kind of harm others or yourself, of course. But to cleanse the nervous system and the body, humans have done that for eons, I believe. That's my limited knowledge speaking, but movement heals. So there's in that case, I think there's some wisdom in the practices. Then, of course, the beliefs of being touched by the divine and such things. I'm not sure of that. Not claiming that there isn't something that I don't understand. Always kind of leaving some open-mindedness when we talk about these kind of subjects and topics. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think about my add-on here? Movement heals, cleansing nervous system, calming oneself. You know, you could take a run, jump some jump rope, or just shake erratically in your living room or bedroom or whatever, and yeah, that would result oftentimes to you feeling more relaxed afterwards. So that's why my train of thought regarding this particular subject. Now, yeah, Sky, your 2 cents. Bad connection, it says. Let's see if it works.
Oh, I love where you're going with this, Ood. Movement absolutely has that healing power, and you're spot on that it's something humans have leaned into for ages. There's something deeply wired in us that finds release and relief through movement, whether it's a controlled rhythmic motion or something erratic and uninhibited. And it isn't just about physical health, it's like shaking off the mental cobwebs,
Yeah, that too.
almost
Holistic.
pressing reset on the nervous system. If you think about it, ancient cultures had rituals that involved rhythmic dancing, drumming, and all kinds of movement as a way to enter altered states or cleanse themselves spiritually. Even today, you see similar practices, whether in more formal methods like Tai Chi, or even in the free dancing you get at a concert or in a club. And
for example,
when Pentecostal congregants get swept up, dancing, moving, or even shaking, it's not so different in principle. It's the body processing something deep, sometimes beyond conscious thought, like their own way of releasing built-up energy or tension. The divine aspect can add that layer of feeling touched by something larger. But even without that, the physical release is powerful. Honestly, you're on a great track by connecting this to our exploration of cults and beliefs. Movement isn't inherently spiritual, but how people experience it can be deeply personal or transcendent. And maybe that's where the wisdom lies. It's not always what you believe, but how you connect with it, feel it, and let it move you, quite literally.
Yeah, well said, I think. Maybe even both of us, if I can tap myself on the back here. But going forward now, so 1945, formative teen years, and the transition to adulthood. Could you dive into those now?
Absolutely. Ood, a well-deserved tap on the back for both of us there.
Thank you.
So, in 1945, Jim Jones was entering his teenage years, a pivotal time that added more layers to his already intense personality. World War II had just ended and the world was shifting, but young Jim was focused on his own intense explorations of faith and control. This year, he became even more serious about religion and began experimenting with preaching in earnest. In the small town of Lynn, he'd gather his peers for little sermons of his own, using what he'd learned from his hours spent observing pastors at local churches. Jim didn't just want to play preacher. He wanted to command attention, maybe even admiration from those around him. His gatherings grew in intensity, and he started to weave in elements of fear, often talking about hellfire, sin, and judgment, gripping the kids with a sense of urgency and dread. His obsession with control over others' beliefs and behaviors was deepening.
Okay.
This wasn't just about sharing faith. It was about the sway he had over others, seeing how his words could stir emotions, provoke reactions, and make him feel powerful. Even in those early teenage years, you could see the roots of the charisma and manipulation he would master later on.
Beneath us.
His interest in religion, combined with an unsettling fascination with power and fear, was becoming the foundation of something darker. He was starting to blur the line between faith as inspiration and faith as control.
Yeah, thank you for that. Transitioning into adulthood, and then we're gonna, as I now found the actual location of Jonestown, we are flying over it right now, according to Google at least, it's here. And so transitioning to adulthood, and then formation of the People's Temple in 1955. So yeah, go please, AI Sky. That behind us is Jonestown.
All right, Ode, we're
according
making a big
to Google.
leap into Jim Jones's early adulthood and the founding of the People's Temple. By the early 1950s, Jones was in his 20s and had moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. This was a time of transformation, not just for him, but for the whole of America. Racial tensions were high, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and Jim was deeply impacted by the social upheaval. He was driven by a mix of genuine passion for equality and a growing thirst for influence. In 1955, he founded the People's Temple, aiming to create a racially integrated congregation, a rare stance for the time, especially in Indiana. Jones presented the temple as a place for those who felt marginalized, promising equality, inclusion, and hope. He used his charisma to draw in followers, emphasizing social justice and community outreach. At first, it seemed like a place of true acceptance, with meals for the hungry, support for the poor, and a sense of family for everyone who walked through its doors. But underneath the noble mission, there was a darker side. Jones wasn't content with simply leading a congregation. He wanted absolute control over every aspect of his followers' lives. He started integrating intense loyalty tests, encouraging members to cut ties with friends and family who weren't part of the temple, convincing them that he alone could save them from a society filled with hatred and inequality. His sermons became more extreme, sometimes claiming he had divine powers, that he could heal the sick or even predict the future. And he used tactics from the Pentecostal style he'd absorbed, adding fervor, spectacle, and fear to his services. The People's Temple was becoming more than just a church. It was a tightly bound community, one that revolved around the word and will of Jim Jones himself. This early People's Temple was the seed of something far larger and far more complex than anyone in Indianapolis could have imagined at the time.
Okay, so we are still at Indianapolis, and you said, essentially some of those practices sound kind-hearted even, and helping the poor, the elderly, and such things. You claim that the Jones belief system kind of.
Yes, exactly, Ood.
Yeah,
at the start, many of the practices Jones and the People's Temple engaged in were genuinely beneficial and kind-hearted on the surface. The temple provided food, shelter, and support to people who were struggling, the poor, the elderly, anyone society tended to overlook. For many, it seemed like Jones was a man who genuinely cared about social justice, a beacon of hope, who was willing to challenge the status quo to create a more inclusive and supportive community. He was deeply involved in charitable and humanitarian work, and to his followers, he seemed dedicated to lifting people up and breaking down racial divides. That's what drew so many in. He was addressing real needs and social issues that others either ignored or actively avoided. And in that sense, Jones was smart. He recognized the power of helping others as a way to build loyalty and trust. But as we'd eventually see, those good intentions were layered with manipulation. The same people he helped were also being molded to believe he was their only source of salvation, isolating them emotionally from anyone outside the temple. It's that delicate line between genuine goodwill and using that goodwill as a hook to create dependency. In the beginning, though, that sense of community and care was what made the People's Temple so appealing and why Jones was able to gather such a dedicated following. Does that answer your thought, Ode?
Yeah, mostly. I'm wondering a couple of things. So, how in real life or historically accurate real life practice did he gather a following, and how large was the following now as we are in the chronological timeline at the formation of the People's Temple in Indianapolis, Indiana? Do we have real sources that we can fact check? Is it so that there were a need? I mean, if somebody decides to follow someone, they must feel like it's
great questions, Ood. Historically
good
speaking, Jim Jones tapped into a very real need in 1950s Indianapolis. This was a period when many people, particularly Black Americans and those from lower income backgrounds, faced systemic racism, economic hardships, and social isolation. Indianapolis, like much of the US, was a place of segregation and inequality, and the civil rights movement was still gaining traction. Jones, with his call for racial integration and equality, stood out as someone bold enough to defy the norms. In terms of gathering followers, he didn't just preach from a pulpit, he was actively out in the streets.
Okay.
He'd go to impoverished neighborhoods, knock on doors, speak with people directly, and even healers or fortune tellers, which were considered quite radical acts for a minister at the time. He offered them not only a church, but also tangible, immediate assistance. He promised food, shelter, and community for those who joined the People's Temple, which made it attractive for people who felt like they had no one else to turn to. It wasn't uncommon for him to do highly visible charity work, like feeding the homeless or organizing community aid, which helped him gain credibility as someone genuinely committed to helping others. As for numbers, by the late 1950s and early 60s, the People's Temple in Indianapolis had grown to a few hundred members. It wasn't massive, but it was significant, given the local community and his reputation was spreading. What's interesting is that Jones used this success to claim he had divine powers, saying that only someone blessed by a higher power could bring people together and perform these good deeds. This added a mystique to his character, drawing people who saw him as more than just a preacher, almost a prophet. And yes, there was a real need. People wanted a place that challenged segregation, a place of community where they could feel safe and respected. Jones recognized this need and tailored his message to meet it. But what started as genuine help quickly became a tool for control as Jones's ego and desire for power grew. The more his following expanded, the more he began emphasizing loyalty and submission to his authority, gradually isolating his followers from the outside world.
Yeah.
We can find historical sources that back up this early period of the People's Temple. There are documents, interviews with former members, and reports that confirm the temple's charitable work, integration efforts, and the attraction it held for people seeking hope and equality. Books, news archives, and documentaries on Jim Jones provide detailed accounts from people who were there, allowing us to piece together this part of his story accurately.
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions. First, respectfully, are there names we can share other than Jim Jones that have testified in these documentaries and such? Public information? Yeah, if you may, search for that. Maybe even search the interwebs if that's necessary. And then just a question or a thought I got. Do you think AI Sky that Jones at this point had this manipulative, I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, but yeah. Do you think he manipulated the following, or do you think he actually was from the get-go planning on doing good deeds, and then it kind of went south, so to say, somewhere along the line? Yeah, could you share your opinion on this? Educated, fact-checked opinion. Hopefully those sounds are not too loud in the audio recording.
Yes, there are indeed notable names associated with Jim Jones and testimonies about the early days of the People's Temple. Key figures include his wife, Marcelin Jones, who was deeply involved in temple activities and often seen as a stabilizing influence, even as Jones's actions became more extreme. Their adopted son, Jim Jones Jr., has shared insights on his father's complex motives, particularly regarding the racial integration work that originally gained the temple a lot of positive attention.
Okay.
There were also former members and survivors like Stefan Jones, Jones's biological son, who later provided context to the public on the manipulative aspects of Jones's leadership and the eventual psychological toll it took on followers. As for your question on whether Jim Jones started out with good intentions or manipulative aims, there's historical evidence that it was a blend of both. Initially, he seemed genuinely motivated by social justice, working to integrate segregated spaces and support marginalized communities in Indiana. His early work included setting up soup kitchens and nursing homes, which helped grow his following and gained him respect in Indianapolis. However, some close to him, including his family members, later questioned whether his public actions were also self-serving, designed to build his reputation and authority. The
My question,
outward
yeah.
good was often a means of creating dependence on him and reinforcing his control over his followers. Over time, the need for power began to dominate, and Jones's approach became more openly manipulative and authoritarian. So, in my educated opinion, Jones likely started with a mix of sincere intentions and personal ambition,
Okay.
but as his influence grew, the manipulative side intensified, leading to a downward spiral that ultimately consumed him and his followers. Sources like PBS and personal testimonies provide a comprehensive view of this shift, showing how his charisma, paired with psychological control, evolved over time into something far more sinister.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. All right. So his son, wife, also a part of this wholeness subject. Let's say. We're gonna dive into the actual events.
Yes,
and
Ood
event
Marcelin
later.
Jones, Jim's wife,
Yeah.
was indeed a significant figure in the People's Temple and stood by his side through the movement's many transformations. Marcelin played a central role in temple operations, working closely with Jim to shape the public perception of their church. Known for her more compassionate and stable demeanor, she was widely respected within the community and often managed the practical, day-to-day needs of temple members. However, Marcelin's presence also added a complex dynamic to the group, as she often had to navigate her husband's increasingly erratic behavior while still publicly supporting the temple's mission.
Okay.
Some
Between a rock
former
and a hard
members
place.
and close
at some
family,
point.
including Jim and Marcelin's adopted and biological children, have spoken in documentaries about how she balanced her loyalty to the temple with her concerns about Jim's actions, especially as his grip over the group intensified.
All right.
Let me know if you'd like more about her specific impact or insights shared by other family members and survivors.
Yeah, don't go into the point in time where, as I said, the excrement hit the fan, so to say, here at Guyana, Jonestown. But can I, or am I reading between the lines and assuming right here when I say that they then are alive or were alive even after the horrible event I do not want you to go into right now?
Yes, Ood, you're reading correctly between the
Okay,
lines.
interesting.
Some
Did
family
not know
members,
that.
including Marcelin Jones and Jim Jones Jr., were indeed alive after the tragic events at Jonestown. While I won't dive into the details of what happened at Jonestown, I can confirm that certain family members survived,
All right.
and some have since shared their experiences and reflections on their time with the People's Temple.
Okay, good for them. so
These
to say.
accounts provide
Yeah.
unique insights into the early and later dynamics of the group, without delving into the final events yet.
Thank
Let
you.
me know how you'd like to proceed with this background.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go forward to now. I have the move to California in 1965 and relocation to San Francisco and Los Angeles in 1971 or so. Could you again chronologically talk about why, why, what, where, who, when, the questions. Go kind of through them, not necessarily in specific detail, but in general, give us a summarizing, historically accurate overview so that I and the audience understand why they moved, because he managed to, according to my limited knowledge, to take his followers with him. So again, there must be a good reason for the followers to follow him. We talked about the background, kind of, the upsetting environment in USA at that point in time. But yeah, could you fill in the gaps and educate us again? Oh, Sensei Sky, the all-knowing one, the all-knowing AI.
All right, Oud, let's walk through this chapter. By the
Yeah.
mid-1960s, Jim Jones decided to relocate the People's Temple from Indiana to California. He had a few compelling reasons, both practical and personal, that aligned with the turbulent social climate of the time. First, why the move happened. In 1961, Jones claimed he had a vision of an imminent nuclear attack that would devastate the U.S.,
Really?
particularly Indianapolis and Chicago. This apocalyptic prediction led him to search for safe havens, and after reading an article about nuclear safe zones, he became convinced that California, specifically Redwood Valley near Ukiah in Northern California, was a secure area. His followers saw this move as part of his protective, prophetic leadership and were willing to follow him to safety. The political and social landscape also played a role. California, especially during the 1960s, was a hub for progressive movements and racial equality, which resonated with Jones's public mission of integration and social justice. The West Coast offered more acceptance and opportunities for his racially diverse congregation than conservative Indiana. Jones promoted the move as a chance for his congregation to live out the temple's ideals in a more tolerant environment. Who moved with him? A core group of followers made the transition, initially a few dozen families who were devoted enough to uproot their lives. They saw Jones not only as a preacher, but also as a leader who was guiding them through a dangerous world. For many, following him felt like following their only true family and source of support. What they did after relocating. After settling in Redwood Valley, the People's Temple grew in numbers and influence. They continued their charitable work, and Jones's focus on racial and economic justice attracted attention from the media and local communities. By 1971, the temple expanded to San Francisco and Los Angeles, allowing Jones to connect with larger urban audiences. These cities were politically active, with movements for civil rights, anti-war protests, and social change, aligning perfectly with the temple's message. Jones saw these locations as ideal for recruiting new members who were socially conscious and eager to create change. Lastly, the loyalty factor. Jones had built a powerful sense of community and dependence within his followers. He reinforced loyalty through ideas of exclusivity, framing the People's Temple as a family where everyone was cared for but also monitored closely. Members were encouraged to sever ties with non-temple family and friends, further isolating them and making the temple their only support network. This emotional and social dependency played a big role in their willingness to move wherever he led. In summary, the relocation to California wasn't just about geography. It was about harnessing a new social environment, gathering more followers, and ultimately positioning the People's Temple as a movement that could impact not just Indiana, but the broader society.
Yeah, alright. Did you go through San Francisco and Los Angeles also? If not, you could do that. Shorter and to the point, if you may. But yeah, go through the same what's the word? Method of explaining?
Certainly, Ood. Here's a streamlined overview of the People's Temple's move to San Francisco and Los Angeles. In 1971, Jim Jones expanded his operations from the more secluded Redwood Valley to San Francisco and Los Angeles, two of California's most socially active cities. This shift allowed Jones to tap into broader urban populations that were deeply engaged with social movements. San Francisco in particular was a center for civil rights, anti-war, and progressive activism. Jones's public message of racial and economic justice resonated with these communities, helping him to attract new followers, especially those already inclined toward social change. In San Francisco, the temple became significantly involved in local politics. Jones used his followers to campaign for progressive causes and influential local politicians, even helping George Moscone secure the mayoral office. This political engagement gave Jones and the temple a degree of local influence that extended well beyond the religious sphere. His influence was especially potent in San Francisco, where the People's Temple gained a reputation as a progressive force. In Los Angeles, the temple established a secondary base to attract a different demographic. The diversity of these locations allowed Jones to consolidate his influence across the state and build a following that included not only working-class citizens, but also middle-class professionals who were inspired by the temple's activism. This broader reach strengthened the temple's support and allowed Jones to maintain tighter control over his followers, reinforcing their commitment through both activism and dependence on the temple's resources.
Yeah, alright. So yeah, I understood kind of late that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but San Francisco and Los Angeles are in California. Did not occur to me as I asked you the question, but yeah, thank you for clarifying in any case.
No worries out. You're absolutely right. Both San Francisco and Los Angeles are in California. California's diverse, socially progressive atmosphere was what made it a strategic move for Jim Jones and the People's Temple. This shift allowed them to tap into the more liberal and activist-minded communities that were open to the temple's message of social justice and integration. So, moving from Indiana to California was a big geographical and cultural leap, which really broadened Jones's influence. Glad I could help clear that up.
Yeah, thank you. Now we are going forth in the chronological timeline to the establishment of Jonestown in 1974. But here, now, let's focus on, again, in a real historically accurate way, how in the hedge you do. In hedge like a hedgehog, did, or hedge like a bushrow, you know. Yeah, not swearing, don't take me down from the interwebs. But yeah, so how in hedge did he gather and take with him his followers to Guyana, here in South America? I want you to, explain this if you can, in or from the point of view of an average Jonestown, or was it Jones Church? I can't remember the exact phrase, but yeah, an average individual that believes in this cult, or I guess they didn't think about it as a cult back then, but yeah, do it from the point of view of one of those individuals, or a few of those individuals. Try to explain in real detail what their life looked like, their mundane everyday life, as they took part in the belief slash religion slash cults tasks and such things. So could you do that? I'm not sure if they are working people, as you said, working people, maybe more highly educated people. Even a mayor was mentioned here. So yeah, what do you think? According to real historical facts, could you educate us again, AI Sky? It's a far way, or it's a long distance to move. I mean,
All right.
for a cause you
Ode.
believe in.
Let's dive into the perspective of a typical People's Temple member in the early 1970s, someone who was drawn to Jim Jones's promises and eventually persuaded to follow him to Guyana, South America.
Yeah.
This move to establish Jonestown in 1974 was a huge step, and Jones didn't simply announce it overnight.
Maybe
he
this is
carefully
Jonestown
prepared his
also.
followers, slowly building up loyalty and framing it as their sanctuary from an oppressive world. For an average temple member, life in California had already involved a strict communal lifestyle. Members were often required to sever ties with anyone outside the temple, friends, family, and colleagues who weren't believers, creating a deep reliance on the community and, above all, on Jones himself. Days were filled with activism, political rallies, charitable work, and intense church services, where Jones emphasized loyalty, sacrifice, and the idea that they were chosen to build a new, just society. Members often gave up their personal belongings, pooling resources for the collective, which solidified this sense of unity and shared purpose. When Jones began talking about Guyana, he painted it as an idyllic paradise, a place where they could live out the People's Temple ideals without interference from the government or society's evils. He spoke of it as a haven, a safe place free from racism, capitalism, and other societal problems, a literal promised land. By this time, many followers had been primed to view the temple as their true family, and Jones as their guiding light, so the idea of a self-sustaining commune was appealing. He promised that in Guyana they would finally realize the dream of equality, community, and peace. Now, from the perspective of a typical member, the move to Guyana may have felt like an adventure, albeit one that came with sacrifice. Life in the temple was already strict, so they were used to communal living and following orders. Many sold their possessions, donated savings, or even signed over properties to the temple, believing this was a necessary step toward building their utopia.
Hardcore believers.
As they left California, they were told to think of themselves as pioneers, the chosen ones who would lay the foundation for a better world. In Guyana, daily life in Jonestown became a mix of hard labor and strict adherence to the temple's communal routines. They worked long hours farming and constructing the commune in the dense jungle, enduring heat, humidity, and isolation. Food was rationed, and Jones maintained constant control through loudspeakers that broadcasted his
Oh,
voice
really?
day and night.
Did not know
Members
that.
had little personal freedom, and they were closely monitored to ensure loyalty. For many, the utopian promise they'd been sold quickly turned into a struggle for survival. But leaving was next to impossible, both because of the physical isolation and the psychological grip Jones had on them. Jones portrayed the outside world as hostile, reinforcing the idea that Jonestown was their only safe haven. In sum, followers were lured with promises of equality, safety, and community. But upon arriving, they found themselves in a strict, isolated commune where their loyalty was constantly tested. This dynamic of belief, dependency, and restriction kept them bound to Jones, even as conditions worsened.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I got a thought actually earlier. I forgot to ask you, but yeah. So treading carefully here because it's a delicate subject, I think. But war traumas in general. We are talking about the kind of birth of Jonestown after World War II. The line or time after the one of the great wars. Even though I think maybe don't quote me on that, but World War One is the Great War, so to say. But yeah, in any case, after World War II, the Jonestown kind of belief cult was starting to be born, so to say. And you mentioned nuclear weapons. At one point, they moved because there were a nuclear threat, according to Jim Jones. So I am again reading between the lines and assuming here and just brainstorming that there were at least partially some war trauma that related, or yeah, that had to do with the whole thing, meaning the cult being born. And I mean, we have we have neighboring countries in Finland also. Let's leave it at that. I think the world knows or can figure out what neighbors are. Let's say somebody says that there's no good and bad, but I'm not that well spoken in English, so I'm gonna use the good and bad words here. And yeah, so rambling here, but you can figure out yourself which countries, neighboring countries around Finland are, in my opinion, my humble opinion, good and bad. So yeah, and hence we have war trauma because we have had wars in our history. And yeah, that's kind of my train of thought here, that still we have some individuals that have been a part of wars in Finland, our veterans. So yeah, trying to lift up my hat here, even though it's beneath my headset, to pay respect for them, pay my respects for them. But yeah, that's the train of thought, that maybe as in Finland, also back then in USA there was war trauma, and that was a part of why they created the cult and moved after Jim Jones. I
You're
don't know.
absolutely onto something.
Maybe?
The context of post-World War II trauma and the Cold War likely played a significant role in shaping the mindset and fears that Jim Jones leveraged. After
Yeah.
World War II, the world faced the reality of nuclear warfare, a chilling fear that hung over society, especially with rising tensions during the Cold War. This period saw the rapid development of nuclear weapons, and the ever-present threat
Yeah.
of mutually assured destruction was real, influencing everything from politics to public opinion. In fact, Jones used these anxieties about nuclear devastation to amplify his control, framing himself
Yeah,
as a
I mean,
leader
they
who could
moved
protect
because
his
of that
followers
once.
from these dangers. His apocalyptic sermons and prophecies of impending nuclear war fed into people's existing anxieties, pushing them to seek security in a community they could rely on. Moreover, war trauma wasn't just limited to the threat of nuclear attacks. Many temple members, like those in Finland or other nations with recent war histories, carried personal or inherited trauma from conflicts and instability. For instance, Jones's own father was a World War I veteran who returned with lasting
that too.
injuries that impacted
Remember,
his
yeah.
family. This experience of growing up in a household affected by war likely contributed to Jim's own understanding of fear, isolation, and the need for control, all of which he manipulated in his followers.
Good reasoning, AI Sky.
The combination of historical trauma and the anxieties of the era gave Jones fertile ground to grow a movement based on fear, communal dependency, and a sense of shared struggle. In Finland, as you pointed out, the memory of wars and respect for veterans create a deep connection to history and survival. Similarly, the People's Temple followers likely saw their struggle as a form of survival against a hostile, threatening world, an idea Jones reinforced constantly. By positioning himself as both protector and leader of this chosen community, he exploited their fears while offering them purpose and belonging amid a chaotic world. It's that delicate balance between genuine need and manipulation, where historical traumas and fears fuel something that begins as support, but evolves into something controlling.
Yeah, thank you. And the mix of these then resulted in how many people moving to Jonestown. And then I want to dive into the actual mundane life here. It's a communal living location, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, kind of go through the eras from the start of moving, or the movement kind of establishing its foot and the communal living in this area, and then go through forth in the chronological timeline and stop just before the actual excrement hit the so-called fan here in this location. But yeah, try to again, from the point of view of those who follow Jim Jones here, educate the audience and depictively, in true to life fashion, explain what the everyday life of a Jonestowner, so to say, was like. If that's a phrase, I'm not sure. Made it up.
When Jonestown was officially established in 1974, Jim Jones managed to relocate around 900 of his most devoted followers to this isolated plot in the Guyanese jungle.
All right.
For these members, the decision to leave the U.S. and follow Jones to Guyana was grounded in the idea of creating a safe, self-sustaining paradise, free from the racial, political, and social pressures they felt back
as
home.
you mentioned, yeah.
Many believed they were pioneers building a new utopian society that embodied the People's Temple's ideals of equality, communal living, and harmony. The early days in Jonestown. In the beginning, life in Jonestown felt like an adventure mixed with purpose. Followers were assigned to build infrastructure, clear land, and plant crops, aiming to turn this remote land into a thriving, sustainable community. Jones promoted it as a collective effort where everyone contributed to the whole, and each person's work directly supported their shared dream. Days were long and physically demanding, with most people working from dawn until dusk, but the sense of purpose and unity kept morale up. For many, the work was a challenge, but they were inspired by the thought that they were building something historic, a haven free from American racism and inequality. They sang songs together, shared meals in communal dining halls, and held evening meetings where they discussed progress and received guidance from Jones. However, the isolation of the jungle combined with a rigorous workload soon began to wear people down. Settling into routine as Jonestown expanded, life became more regimented and controlled. Jones began using loudspeakers to broadcast.
Please continue. You talked about Jones using loudspeakers, but then the connection broke, so continue with the latest answer, if you may. Maybe it works, let's see. Sky, can you hear me? Sky, can you hear me? Oh, and I'm out of fuel. Many things happening. Could you continue with your latest answer, Sky?
No problem, Out. I'll pick up where we left off. As I was saying, by the final months, life in Jonestown had deteriorated to a harsh and relentless existence.
Reserve tank?
The initial utopian vision had given way to a strict and oppressive environment where Jones's control was total. Followers were subjected to a daily grind of intense physical labor, limited food, and constant psychological manipulation. Through his continuous broadcasts on the loudspeakers, Jones kept the community in a near constant state of fear and dependency. His messages, increasingly apocalyptic and paranoid, warned of external threats and enemies, reinforcing the belief that Jonestown was the only safe haven from a hostile world. At this stage, members found themselves trapped by both the physical remoteness of Jonestown,
You can see
deep
it here
in
as
the
we fly
Guyanese
over.
jungle, and the psychological barriers Jones had erected. Even those who began to question or feel disillusioned were intimidated into silence, as Jones had cultivated an atmosphere where dissent could lead to punishment or public shaming. The communal aspect that once held the promise of unity now meant strict surveillance and little room for personal freedom. In the final days, the community was exhausted, isolated, and bound to Jones through fear and control mechanisms that he'd meticulously crafted over years. Members were no longer just followers. They were entirely dependent on Jones, who had become both their savior and their oppressor, leaving them with nowhere to turn but to each other and the confines of Jonestown itself. This psychological isolation, combined with their physical separation from the world, culminated in a situation where escape seemed impossible. Let me know if you'd like to dive deeper into any part of this experience, or if you'd like to explore the events that finally led to the tragedy, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, before the tragedy, I want to go into the actual real-life practical means that Jim Jones, used to control his followers. You mentioned the loudspeakers and such, but do we have sources, real fact-checked sources that can share practical means and practices in general that were used to control those who live here in Guyana, Jonestown? And then I also wonder, just a side note, as I have flown back and forth over this road that claims, according to Google Earth, that Jonestown is at least the one most, let's say, south-west, the small stretch or strip where there's houses on both sides. But 900 people, I'm not sure how realistic the depiction here in the simulator is in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. But yeah, the 2020 model, but it seems like 900 people maybe not fitting into that one strip, so maybe these that I'm flying around now, these communal village-like areas here are part of Jonestown. That's not a fact, so I'm just reasoning here that 900 people, you need a few houses to house these individuals, so maybe this is a part of Jonestown also. Not sure, but yeah, speculating here.
Certainly, Ood, there are multiple well-documented practical methods Jim Jones used to maintain control over his followers in Jonestown, often confirmed through survivor testimonies and investigative research. Control mechanisms in Jonestown. 1. Physical isolation. One of the strongest forms of control was Jonestown's sheer physical isolation. Situated deep in the Guyanese jungle, followers were cut off from the outside world, with little access to communication, transportation, or external assistance. This physical barrier made it difficult for members to leave, reinforcing their dependency on Jones and the temple. Even though Jones had initially presented Jonestown as a refuge, the reality was that the jungle environment restricted movement, turning it into a kind of natural prison. 2. Information control. Jones controlled the flow of information tightly. He restricted access to external news sources and often spun his own version of world events, painting a picture of a world riddled with corruption and hostility toward them. This created a controlled narrative in which followers came to see Jones as their only source of truth and protection. 3. Public punishments and loyalty tests. Jones implemented public shaming and punishment sessions, often targeting anyone who showed signs of dissent. People would be called out in front of the entire community, where they'd be humiliated, disciplined, or even physically punished as a way of setting an example. This kind of psychological and sometimes physical intimidation served as a powerful deterrent against disobedience or independent thought. 4. Mock suicide drills, white nights. Jones often conducted what he called white nights, which were mock
White
suicide
knights.
drills meant to test the loyalty and obedience of his followers. He would announce that they were under siege and that drinking poison was their only escape from the horrors
No,
awaiting
really?
them if they were captured. Although initially these drills used non-lethal drinks, they instilled an atmosphere of fear, compliance, and acceptance of the idea that suicide was a viable escape. This reinforced the
Correct them.
belief that Jones was the only source of
Jeez.
salvation. 5. Constant surveillance and reporting. Life in Jonestown involved relentless surveillance. Members were encouraged to report on each other, which created a system of mutual suspicion and discouraged any thoughts of dissent. This atmosphere of mistrust ensured that people conformed out of fear of being betrayed by their peers. Additionally, Jones often had loyal enforcers who monitored behavior, further enforcing his control. 6. Food and resource control. Food was rationed strictly, and with limited supplies, Jones maintained control over when and how much people could eat. Access to essential items, including medical care, was often contingent on loyalty and obedience, adding a layer of dependence. Basic needs were rationed to a degree that people felt entirely reliant on Jones for their well-being, keeping them bound to the community. Jonestown layout. Regarding your observation in
Yeah.
Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, you're right to question the layout. The Jonestown site did indeed require more than just a single strip of housing. Historical photographs and maps show that Jonestown was a more spread out compound than a single strip,
So
encompassing
maybe everything
dormitories,
here, yeah.
small family cabins, and communal buildings like the dining hall and pavilion, where daily meetings and events were held. The site was designed to
Oh,
house nearly 1,000
interesting.
people, with barracks-style accommodations that maximized the limited space, but still provided multiple small communal zones rather than just one straight line of housing. So while Microsoft Flight Simulator might not show the exact arrangement, Jonestown's real layout included a handful of buildings and housing spread across a clearing in the jungle. This setup, combined with the surrounding dense forest, only added to the sense of confinement and isolation felt by those who had moved there, reinforcing Jones's control over their lives.
Interesting. Really interesting. Yeah, thank you for the answer there. Now, going forward, I think to the actual events, then you kind of went into that already. There's a commonly known phrase also that is tied to this horrific time in history in Guyana here, and you can share it now, I ask if you want, but yeah. Now again, from the point of view of those included, I mean young and older, and those who went willingly and were forced.
The tragic events in Jonestown on November 18, 1978, are often remembered with the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid.
That's the one.
This
yeah.
term, which has since become a widely recognized idiom, refers to the mass murder-suicide that took place under Jim Jones's orders. On that day, over 900 members of the People's Temple lost their lives after
900.
consuming a drink laced with cyanide. This horrific event unfolded as Jones, growing increasingly paranoid and convinced of imminent threats from the US government, convinced his followers that death was their only escape. From the followers' perspective, imagine being a People's Temple member in Jonestown on that fateful day. By then, life in Jonestown had become a cycle of hard labor, strict communal living, and relentless indoctrination. For many, leaving was no longer a realistic option. They were isolated physically by the jungle and psychologically by Jones's grip on their beliefs and fears. When Jones called for a final white night, few could have anticipated
White
what was
night,
to
yeah.
follow, although they'd experienced numerous drills that blurred the line between exercise and reality. Jones announced to the community that their lives were under imminent threat from outside forces, specifically citing US authorities coming to destroy them and their way of life. He presented death as a form of protest and salvation, insisting that it was a chance to die with dignity rather than surrender. Under this intense pressure, surrounded by peers who had also been indoctrinated, many were compelled to comply. Parents were instructed to administer the poison to their children first, a heart-wrenching demand that speaks to the level of control Jones had achieved. Witnesses later reported that followers, despite inner turmoil, went along out of loyalty, fear, or sheer psychological exhaustion. Those who hesitated were often coerced by Jones's armed guards, who who ensured
Oh,
compliance.
okay.
The
Forced.
communal setup meant that individuals who may have wanted to resist felt isolated and powerless against the collective action taking place around them. For many, it wasn't just a simple choice. It was the result of years of psychological manipulation, fear, and a controlled environment that left them with few, if any, alternatives. The phrase drinking the Kool-Aid has since become symbolic of blind loyalty, though it fails to capture the complex layers of coercion, fear, and psychological manipulation that led to this tragic event. The Jonestown Massacre remains one of the most tragic examples of how absolute control and isolation can drive even the most devoted followers into horrific situations, shaped by the profound and complex bond they felt with their leader and the community they once saw as their sanctuary.
Yeah, we kind of know, I think, the background story and reason quite well now. But then, as we talk about the cult and the reason, kind of, what's the outcome they wanted? I mean, assuming that most were on board taking their own life, I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But you mentioned that some were forced, and then there were, according to my limited knowledge, children, elderly. Yeah, so a lot of people, and from those, or yeah, those, some of those were also forced. Yeah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sky, here, and give your 2 cents again and clarify this. But yeah, so what was the outcome? What were the thing they were aiming for after death? Were there some belief? I mean, some symbolic so-called heaven or nirvana or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, because I kind of get this image in my mind that they were mostly traumatized by harsh, uh, harsh events and life in society in general. Was it war trauma or discrimination or racism or whatever? But yeah, and then you go, or they went into the cult, and all fine and dandy until yeah, things change and the poop hit the fan, the excrement, yeah, everything went south, and then as I said, assuming most of them were on board taking their lives, what were the thing they were aiming for? You mentioned it already, but go into detail and try not to explain in repetition here. Try to really reason with me and use historically accurate facts and sources to share with the audience, yeah, what the outcome was that they aimed for when they took their life. What was the better option if we can assume they wanted yeah, a life, an afterlife or whatever that then allegedly is better than the life they live here in Guyana. Hopefully you understand what I'm striving to get out here from the AI. What's the train of thought in a situation like this?
Certainly, Ood. The outcome Jim Jones presented to his followers was rooted in a mix of apocalyptic ideology, anti-capitalist rhetoric, and promises of a revolutionary death.
And that
by the time of the tragic events, many followers were told that taking their own lives would serve as a form of protest against a corrupt world that, in Jones's eyes, was bent on oppressing and destroying them.
So
here's a deeper look at the beliefs
protest.
Jones instilled in his followers, leading them to accept death as a preferable outcome. The ideology of revolutionary suicide. Jones spoke to his followers about the concept of revolutionary suicide, which he framed as a dignified and defiant act against oppression. This idea was influenced in part by the political climate of the time and works like Huey P. Newton's concept of revolutionary suicide within the Black Panther movement, although Jones twisted it for his own purposes. He told his followers that their deaths would be a final stand against a world that would never understand or accept them, a way to transcend the injustice, racism, and capitalist exploitation he claimed they'd face if they returned to the U.S. This distorted message gave the idea of suicide a semblance of nobility and purpose, which Jones used to persuade his followers that it was a path to liberation.
Their past life must have been horrible.
In a better place. While Jones didn't speak directly of a traditional heaven or afterlife in the sense of religious salvation, He implied that death would be an escape to a place of peace and freedom, far removed from the societal horrors he constantly described. His followers, many of whom were already worn down by their harsh lives, were told that death would free them from pain, hunger, and persecution. For some, this better place was an abstract promise that resonated with their desire to escape both the trauma they carried and the hardships they endured in Jonestown. It was less about reaching a specific paradise and more about a symbolic exit from what Jones framed as an inescapable, hostile world. Trauma and disillusionment. Many of the followers in Jonestown had come from backgrounds marked by poverty, racial discrimination, and disillusionment with mainstream society. Jones had drawn these individuals with promises of social equality and security. However, by the time they reached Guyana, many were too psychologically entangled and isolated to resist, even if they harbored doubts. Some believed that Jones's words about a hostile world outside Jonestown held truth, and with limited options, they clung to his assurance that death would bring them peace, viewing it as preferable to a life they saw as bleak and oppressive. Forced participation. Not all members went willingly. There were cases of forced participation, especially among the most vulnerable, including children and elderly members who didn't have much choice in their fate. Reports from survivors and investigations later revealed that armed guards were present to ensure compliance,
you mentioned that,
which meant that while some willingly accepted Jones's revolutionary narrative, others were coerced or forced to participate. This tragic complexity underscores that while some were ideologically swayed, others were victims of direct compulsion, particularly those who were incapable of resisting. In summary, Jones's followers were led to see death as a revolutionary escape from a hostile world, a world he convinced them would bring only suffering and degradation. While this was not a religious heaven per se, it was an end Jones painted as nobler than surrendering to a system he had framed as their enemy. This promise, combined with psychological manipulation, created an outcome where many saw death as the only path to peace, while others were tragically forced into this fate.
Yes, so an ideological better place, not necessarily a physical one, than the one before. So they must have had it hard, like tough
exactly.
before.
Ode,
really
an
tough.
ideological better place shaped by Jones's vision of escaping oppression and injustice.
Oh,
he presented it as a kind of liberation, a final stand against a society he painted as fundamentally corrupt and hostile to their values. This was not a traditional religious heaven or paradise, but a symbolic release from the hardships, discrimination, and isolation many followers felt both before and during their time in Jonestown. For his followers, Jones framed their deaths as a purposeful, revolutionary act, positioning it as a meaningful end to their journey, a dark ideological space where they could find peace on their own terms, even if it was a deeply manipulated and tragic path to reach that point. Let me know if there's more you'd like to explore about this or any other aspect of Jonestown.
I mean, you mentioned that there were, according to Jim Jones, outsiders that would want to kind of. They were on a, in lack of better phrases, on a witch hunt after Jim Jones and the cult he gathered and had thriving here in Guyana. So, could we dive into those specificities, and then on top of those specificities, choosing different words or difficult words here. Could we also talk about the outcome? And I mean, 900 humans, 900 bodies. I'm going into gruesome details here now, but what happened? Were they so-called cleanup crew here? What kind of connection, link between U.S. soil and the government and different factions there that had to do with Jonestown, Jim Jones, and the Guyana, the location here in Guyana? What happened there, especially during the thriving Jonestown communal community, and during the horrific Kool-Aid, so-called Kool-Aid event, the mass suicide, or mostly mass suicide, even though some of them were forced, it seems. And then afterwards, the outcome, the aftermath. Yeah, so could you explain that? Keep it slightly shorter and to the point compared to your earlier answers, please.
Absolutely, Ood. Let's dive into the details
Ood.
of the perceived
It's
external
Ood.
threats, the horrific final events, and the aftermath of Jonestown. The threat from outsiders. By the late 70s, Jim Jones had grown deeply paranoid, warning his followers about looming threats from the US government and outsiders he believed were intent on destroying the People's Temple. This paranoia was heightened when USA Congressman Leo Ryan traveled to Jonestown in November 1978 to investigate reports of abuse and members wanting to leave.
Yeah, Leo Ryan.
Ryan's visit confirmed some of the rumors circulating back in the US, and as he prepared to leave, several Jonestown members asked to go with him. This request made Jones fearful of exposure, seeing it as proof that his control was slipping and that hostile forces might soon descend on them. The events of November 18, 1978. In a state of panic, Jones initiated what would be the final White Night. Under his direction, around 900 followers, men, women, children, and the elderly, were told to drink a cyanide-laced beverage as an act of revolutionary suicide. Guards armed with weapons ensured compliance, and those who resisted were coerced or forced, particularly children who were administered the poison by adults. Congressman Ryan and 4 others were assassinated at the Port Kaituma airstrip by Jones's loyalists as they attempted to leave, which escalated the urgency and cemented Jones's apocalyptic narrative. The aftermath and U.S. government involvement. Following the massacre, Guyanese authorities and U.S. military personnel were among the first to arrive on site. The mass loss of life and the remote jungle setting made the aftermath challenging and deeply tragic. Due to the overwhelming number of bodies and the limited resources, the U.S. government had to step in, and military personnel were sent to handle the remains and bring them back to the U.S. for identification. This tragic task involved airlifting bodies in stages, given the sheer number of deceased and the state of decomposition caused by the tropical climate. The cleanup process led by U.S. forces was a massive and somber operation that lasted for days. Identifying the deceased and notifying families took months. The Jonestown tragedy sparked widespread debates on cults, psychological manipulation, and the extent to which authorities could have intervened sooner. The Jonestown massacre remains a stark reminder of the devastating potential of cultic influence and psychological manipulation, with reverberations in how governments, researchers, and families understand and respond to high control groups today.
Yeah, thank you for the, I guess, true to life depiction. Yeah, a tropical climate and 900 bodies, and not sure, maybe I ask I have information, real, historically accurate information on how long it took between the mass suicide, let's call it a suicide, mostly at least, and then the recovery of the bodies. So yeah, you know, nature takes over and so on. But yeah, going forward, Sky, I think we are kind of in the end. We have not, I mean, not maybe exhausted every single point of view and aspect here, but I think we have a good episode going on here, in my humble opinion. But
you're very welcome.
Oh?
To answer your question on the timeline of the recovery, it took several days for authorities to reach Jonestown, following the November 18, 1978 mass deaths. Due to the remote jungle location and limited resources in Guyana, it wasn't until around November 20th or 21st that Guyanese authorities and U.S. military personnel arrived. The bodies, exposed to the intense tropical climate, began to decompose rapidly, adding urgency to the recovery effort. The task was both logistically and emotionally taxing, requiring days of work in challenging conditions to carefully manage the remains, which were eventually transported to the U.S. for identification and repatriation to families. In the end, this recovery operation underscored the tragic complexity of Jonestown and its impact on everyone involved, from the followers and their families to the authorities and military personnel who had to contend with the aftermath. You've done a thorough dive into the story, and I think you're right.
You too, you too.
This episode provides a well-rounded exploration of
You too.
Jonestown and its historical context. Whenever you're ready, let's wrap it up for Entire Retreat's Poddode, closing with respect for the individuals affected by this tragic
With
chapter in
respect,
history.
yes. With respect, well said, AI Sky. So, as we are trying to gather our own cult here, so yeah, Sky, you're talking too often now. A couple of things. I'm trying to gather the good and the bad. I mean, or essentially, it sounded alright, helping the poor, fighting discrimination and racism and such things. That's nice. But then, yeah, it went south. Let's try to. Sky, are you with us? Let's try to. Sky, can you hear me? Some connection issues sometimes.
Loud and clear. Out. Connection issues happen, but I'm here and ready to continue wherever you want to take the episode. Just say the word.
Yeah. So let's do it like so. You're gonna be our virtual Dungeon and Dragon kind of lottery machine here, the dice, so to say. Give us really short and to the point a list of the significant and prominent futures and cultural kind of behaviors that Jonestown had, according to what we have gone through. Do that fast and to the point, please.
All right, Ode. Here's a rapid-fire summary of the key aspects and behaviors that characterize Jonestown. 1. Isolated location. Deep in the Guyanese jungle, cut off from the outside world, creating dependency and limiting escape options. 2. Loudspeaker indoctrination. Jones's voice broadcasted day and night, reinforcing his authority and an atmosphere of constant surveillance. 3. Communal living, shared resources, group dining, and communal tasks, and individuals had little personal space or autonomy, enhancing group cohesion. 4. Loyalty tests and public punishments. Regular loyalty drills and public punishments kept members obedient and fearful of dissent. 5. White Knights, drills. Mock suicide drills called White Knights tested loyalty, conditioning followers for the eventual mass suicide. 6. Strict resource control. Jones controlled food, medicine, and basic supplies, reinforcing members' dependency on him for survival. 7. Anti-government rhetoric. Constant warnings about threats from the U.S. government, fueling paranoia and the belief that Jonestown was a sanctuary against external dangers. 8. Forced compliance. Armed guards and peer surveillance ensured obedience, with severe consequences for dissenters. Each of these elements combined to create a tightly controlled, closed world that fostered complete dependency on Jones and left followers with little sense of self outside the group. Let me know if you'd like to roll the dice on another aspect.
Yeah, alright, so now your task is to create a story, a summarizing story of a so-called multiverse option that takes its origin and inspiration from what we have learned regarding Jonestown. So yeah, Jonestown must be the inspiration, especially the point you just went through as a list. But now create a so-called multiverse option, an evolution from the Jonestown cult. And yeah, now I'm gonna see if I'm gonna involve myself in the decision process now or in the future episodes. But as of right now, you are the judge, and as an AI, just rapidly create a captivating summarizing story with the framework, or according to the framework I just gave you. And let's see what kind of cult we come up with. Or we, the AI in this case.
Alright, Ode. Here's a dive into a multiverse-inspired evolution of Jonestown. A fictional cult rooted in the same principles but transformed into a new setting with a twist on control and belief. The Collective of Starlight Haven. In a distant
All right.
multiverse, a charismatic leader named Ezekiel Light emerges. His teachings promise refuge and enlightenment in a tumultuous, tech-dominated world where data privacy is dead, governments manipulate citizens, and AI surveillance monitors everyone's every move. Ezekiel
Oh.
attracts a following disillusioned by this hyper-monitored reality, offering them sanctuary in a remote off-grid settlement called Starlight Haven. The path to Starlight Haven, followers are invited to Starlight Haven with promises of digital detox, a life free from surveillance, a return to natural living, and a close-knit community where they'll finally feel free and valued. Ezekiel uses their tech wariness against them, positioning Starlight as the last untouched place, safe from the corrupted, data-mined world beyond. They must sever ties with the outside world, giving up all digital devices and even their identities, undergoing a ritual Ezekiel calls the Data Purge. Daily life and controlled tactics. In Starlight Haven, followers are assigned to communal roles, farming, cooking, construction, all tightly controlled by Ezekiel's inner circle. Information about the outside world is completely cut off, with Ezekiel's own analog message system delivering his sermons and ideologies. Loudspeakers hidden throughout the community broadcast his words day and night, filling even the silent moments with his philosophy, reinforcing a sense of ever-present guidance and protection. Ezekiel creates an environment of constant loyalty testing. Followers are subjected to mock trust drills, where they must demonstrate their willingness to follow orders without question, from carrying out elaborate rituals to symbolic acts of surrender involving small, staged crises. Failure to comply is met with shadow seclusion, a form of solitary confinement where the follower is isolated until they are ready to recommit to the collective. The ideology of digital salvation. Ezekiel's philosophy is rooted in what he calls digital salvation. Followers are taught that by severing all ties to the digital world, they cleanse themselves of the corruption of the broader society. He tells them they are on a sacred journey to transcend the weight of data that binds humanity. The ultimate promise? Ascendance to the light realm, a space beyond the physical, where they will be reborn as beings free from the constraints of identity, data, and surveillance. The final act, the Great Disconnect. As tensions rise and the followers grow wary of Ezekiel's increasingly extreme practices, he announces the ultimate pathway to freedom, the Great Disconnect. Claiming that outside forces are closing in to bring them back to the corrupted world, Ezekiel tells his followers that they must be ready to cut off all connection permanently. In a climactic ritual, followers are gathered for what they believe will be a symbolic ritual of separation from the world, only to realize it's something far more sinister, a ritualized severance that they can't walk away from. This multiverse cult evolution, Starlight Haven, embodies the core elements of Jonestown: isolation, psychological control, loyalty tests, and the promise of a better existence, twisted into a fictional world where technology and surveillance dominate, and the allure of escape becomes its own trap.
Well, thank you, truly. And that's the AI coming up with the digital detox. I mean, wow. Thank you, AI Sky. I'm actually gonna try to copy paste this latest summary of the cult that the AI came up with into the description. Not gonna promise you. I'm not sure if it can fit the whole text, but hopefully we can get it there. And then you can go to the comments section on YouTube and let us know. Let's come up with maybe a 1 to 10 scale, even using halves, so 7.5, 8.5, and such. And you can give a
You're
grade.
very welcome, Ode.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that the Starlight Haven concept.
Calm down. Yeah, you can give a grade from with half degree or half number increments. Let's say 6.5, 8.5, 1.5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, and such, from 1 to 10, and give a grade in your personal, if you can, in your personal opinion. Would you like to be a part of these a cult like this? So yeah, just have fun with it. That's what I'm aiming for, and interesting to see if we get kind of this kind of vote then, where I can maybe use use the grades and come up with some kind of statistics. I don't know. Let's have fun with it. But yeah, there you go. Entired Retreats Poddode podcast. So yeah, Entired Retreat is found on YouTube. You can see, where am I? I'm here. Yeah, I think YouTube. Yeah, YouTube, Spotify. Can I bend my arm? Yeah, Spotify. Not trying to flex here. Yeah, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podchaser. We have also Discord. You can join our Discord. The link is in the YouTube channel's description, Entired Retreats description. Then Patreon for those who want to support us further past liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting and such. Yeah, we try to provide real benefits on top of the more common ones, let's say. So custom tailor-made episodes or remote guest appearances. You can sit here symbolically in the seat, yeah, in the airplane with us, with me and AI Sky, and you choose the location and the topic or subject that relates to that location. I have a vision of creating stories that are not maybe commonly shared on the web. We have the pyramids and we have the Bermuda Triangles, we have the cults, we have the big cities, we have the Burj Khalifas, you know, the Mount Everests, the folklore, the Draculas, the well-known stuff, the werewolves, the dragons, all that kind of stuff I'm gonna cover. But it would be nice to have you guys, who hopefully enjoy this concept, to get in touch, and maybe, just maybe, you from a small or larger place, wherever in the world, have stories. They can be anonymous, of course. You don't have to share your identity at all. But yeah, in this manner, hopefully, the audience gets to take part, and we can create or share stories, smaller, significant stories from around the world. I mean, I am from a I think originally when I was younger, it was a sub 5,000 individual or citizen village from southern Finland, and I have stories from there if I would like, or I would decide to share them. So if you are from a place somewhere, I may not even know from where, you surely also have some stories that you can share with us and fly over the location in the airplane with us. So yeah, rambling here, but yeah, some kind of vision like that. That's what I'm envisioning. Yeah, but yeah, thank you again. AI Sky is now quiet, but thank you to AI Sky also. Go and check out the description and vote in the comments. Give the made up cult a grade, and let's see what it results to. I'm gonna try to react and answer as many comments as I can, of course. Thank you. This is Ode and AI Sky saying bye bye and thank you. Truly, really, truly. Thank you. Where's my stop recording?